Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on BC Conservatives picking a new leader. But first, the price of independence.
It's a pretty extensive list that has probably hundreds of billions of dollars worth of startup costs. And people need to understand that about what it would be to set up a fully functional national government from scratch.
With Albertans facing a question on separation in the October referendum, the Premier says it's her government's responsibility to be forthright about the associated costs of leaving Canada so that voters can make an informed decision. Joining us now, Alberta's new President of the Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, Jason Nixon. Minister Nixon, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me on.
All right, so the Premier at a news conference on Monday, we just saw a clip there, but she also confirmed she's been speaking with you about developing a costing document. What exactly have you been tasked with?
Well, the Premier has asked us in the Department of Finance to work with some outside experts to make sure we can put together all the facts associated with potential separation around a referendum question, so that Albertans can have all the best facts that they can get to be able to make their determination in the ballot box on the best way forward. And so this is not about predetermining any outcome. It's just about taking all the information that we have and being able to get facts into the minds of Albertans as they make this important decision.
Okay. So in terms of pulling together relevant data, who do you draw on for expertise? Do you convene a panel of experts from a number of disciplines?
Well, we're going to have more to say about the exact structure shortly, but we'll be making sure that we are using everything in the Department of Finance to its full potential to be able to bring together financial information and other information that the government has access to, and then bringing together experts, including economists and other experts on the difference between federal and provincial government operations, to be able to compile that information in a way that is, can be used by Albertans. There's a lot of complicated information, obviously, as you start to do a deep dive into this process, so we want it to be very accurate and very detailed, but also come forward in a way that is presentable to Albertans, that they can digest that to be able to, again, help them with the decision of the ballot box in October.
In picking up this message now of the high costs associated with independence, why was that not maybe a priority during the Separatists' petition process? Why wait until after your government triggered an actual referendum question on such?
Well, I think there's a difference between when citizens are going around the province collecting signatures and asking for citizen referendum, which is happening on more topics right now than just on separation, compared to when you're actually now in a moment where there's going to be a referendum question. And so that now becomes an issue for Albertans to be able to make sure that they have the facts to be able to determine what the benefits and what the consequences could be of this potential decision for them to then go to the ballot box. Whereas before, this was a conversation that was taking place with citizens asking their government to call a referendum. We're at a different stage of this process now. I will also point out that I've only been the finance minister for under 2 weeks. And I certainly think that this is our responsibility, given what's taking place inside the province, to get the best information I can to Albertans as their finance minister.
Okay, understanding that you've only been on the job a couple of weeks, but if I could ask a question about the referendum itself, the resources required, we're told by Elections Alberta, 60,000 or more Albertans will need to work as election officers, facilitate the vote count according to Elections Alberta. What's your government budgeting for cost? How much is this going to cost?
Well, I don't think we have a final number on the cost, and I won't speak to that as, given I'm not the lead minister, though I will be the minister who has to figure out how to pay for it. I take your point. I think what's really important is that Albertans hear that we will make sure that this process is appropriately funded and that we have the best resources for Elections Alberta to be able to make sure that they can do this job and provide security to this process to make sure that Albertans' democratic rights are protected.
Could it push 100 million, as the leader of the opposition has claimed publicly?
I haven't seen any numbers that are anywhere near that number to be able to make this process work. But as this is put together by Elections Alberta, you'll hear more from Minister Amory as the lead minister on the referendum process. What I can tell you is that for sure we cannot, not make sure that we appropriately fund this process. And so we'll be watching it closely. But any time that Albertans are participating in democracy, it's incumbent upon the government to be able to make sure that it's fully funded and Elections Alberta is able to do their job.
All right. On another front, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the opposition, motorists as well, they're all again renewing the call for your government to bring some relief on the affordability front by parking the 13-cent a litre provincial tax on fuel. What can you share? What's on the way?
Well, we're going to be making some decisions on that very quickly. In Alberta, we have a legislative framework to make assessments on when we would step in to address fuel tax and to help Albertans with the price of fuel. We are now in the review process that is triggered by that legislation, and we will get the results of that by the mid of June. And then shortly after that, we will make the best decision for Albertans that we can to try to be able to get the biggest benefit that we can to all Albertans. Whether or not that's the fuel tax or some other process associated with the fuel tax, we haven't decided yet. What I can be clear, though, is that that relief is coming, and it's coming in line with the legislation before July 1st.
Okay. As we pointed out, it's only been a couple of weeks, but you are back in the role of finance as finance minister for the second time. I think it's in 4 years. How was that first experience with the portfolio informing your approach this time around?
Well, it's interesting to come back a second time. One thing is it's nice the transition's a little bit quicker because you understand how the department works and the players that are here to help you in the bureaucracy. There's a lot of similarities between when I was here in 2022 and now. At that time, there was a war in Ukraine that was pushing up oil prices and an affordability crisis that was taking place across the country. And obviously, that's pretty similar now with what's taking place in Iran and the fact that affordability still remains one of the biggest issues that we have to face. I have to now figure out how to do that, while at the same time making sure that we don't continue to cause structural damage to Alberta's budget, which creates long-term implications for Albertans. And so we're gonna have to go through a lot of similar processes that we did in 2022, and hopefully that experience will help us be able to do that faster and get better results for the people of Alberta.
And how close are you to delivering some sort of financial update?
Well, we will have our year-end update here before the end of the month, and then over the summer we'll get into our first quarterly update. And that's when we're going to be able to actually have a very good picture of where we are at with oil prices, and then be able to have a good conversation with Alberta about the best way that we can utilize that resource, that one-time impact into the Alberta budget in a way that can help Albertans deal with things like affordability, but also make sure we can protect our economy for decades to come.
All right. We'll leave it there. Appreciate your time this evening, Minister Nixon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
That's the new president of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, Jason Nixon. From Smith government messaging on the cost of separation to a new surgery funding model and new leadership for BC Conservatives. Time now for tonight's politics panel. Joining us this evening, Sarah Elder, founder of the political fashion brand Madam Premier, host of the Briefing Note podcast and a former political staffer. And John Brennan is a political analyst and commentator. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with our conversation off the top with Alberta's new finance minister, Jason Nixon. Sarah, what do you make of the government taking this stance now of delving into the costs associated with an independent Alberta?
There should be a podcast and we should have 4 hours, Michael, to discuss this properly. There's so much to unpack in what he said. I want to pick up on two key points. He talked about damage to Alberta's budget, possibly. You know what? This is like really hard for me because I actually think that, and backed up by other organizations like Chambers of Commerce and other very intelligent people who are kind of ringing the alarm. The economic uncertainty caused by this entire exercise has and is already doing damage to Alberta's economic situation. So to talk about this now in terms of, the cost of what this is, we've already been in the cost of this. The cost of having conversations between neighbors and families and communities, between businesses being uncertain if this is the stable environment that they want to invest and bring their employees to if they were thinking about relocating or starting a new business here. we are so far gone. It's hard to listen to that and not have a reaction to it. The other thing, talking about safeguarding democracy, are these ballots? I'm sorry, we're not counting them with a machine. We're going to be counting them by hand again, because we've already done things that have undermined our democracy here in Alberta. Not just the separation referendum that is not supported in a very well-known way by a majority of Albertans. 70% of Albertans do not want this, and yet here we are. So undermining the economy, undermining our democracy in terms of the institutions that we have and established and very safe procedures in our elections. The list goes on and on. So it's hard to take this sometimes, and I don't think that I'm alone in this.
Okay, well, so John, how do you see this costing dialogue, changing dynamics around the entirety of the separation conversation? How much of an impact will this positioning have?
I suspect it's going to have an impact, especially with people that haven't given that much thought to the issue, Michael. It's amazing to me that it is now a revelation to Danielle Smith that there is going to be a cost to this whole exercise, as Sarah very eloquently explained, in terms of confidence that people have in our economy and the instability that this is causing. But of course, this whole idea of Alberta becoming a separate landlocked statelet with no access to tidewater, that somehow we would be prosperous and do better than we are within Canada, is ludicrous. And, and as Danielle Smith spelled out yesterday at her news conference, she said, we'd have to set up a military, would have to set up a border control, would have to take over the funding of all the things that we get from the federal government, health and social transfers, old age security, the Canada pension plan. She just kept going on and on and on. Obviously, there will be a huge economic cost if this ever happened, which is why I don't think it's going to happen. But I am happy that they are going to do this exercise and they are going to publicize it, because I think that might have some impact on some Albertans that haven't given that much thought to this.
Okay, next up, Smith government's test of the public health system in a bid to speed up access to surgery.
Everyone's going to be thinking, how do we reduce the amount of downtime, the amount of wait time, the amount of lost time? How do we make the best use of our resources?
The government rolling out its patient-focused funding model, which will initially involve 12 hospitals that will see their funding for surgeries tied to the number and type of procedures performed rather than blanket budgets. The model applies to knee, hip, and cataract replacements, as well as arthroscopic rotator cuff repairs. John, it was more than a year ago that discussions around this funding model initially emerged. So how do you see the rollout now playing with dynamics in the public health system?
It's really hard to say, Michael, because, they've set up such a confusing process now where they've got, these surgeries being done in public hospitals. At the same time, they're encouraging these private surgical clinics to set up. So, my view is Albertans who are needing surgery, whether it's orthopedic surgery, cataract surgery, or whatever, if they're getting it in a public hospital and it's being paid for by Alberta Health Services, Albertans will be fine with it. I think the bigger problem, Michael, is they're trying to set up a competitive market competition here that will allow private surgical clinics come in to do the same procedures, perhaps at a lesser cost. And those procedures won't be paid for by Alberta Health Services. They'll be paid by individuals. My view, Michael, is that's a clear contravention of the Canada Health Act. And, so we're just going to see how this unfolds.
Okay, so Sarah, I'll pick up on a little bit of that there, but how likely is this to ramp up competition with those chartered surgical facilities and even push to more privatization of the health system?
I'm supportive of moves like this. I think that the system in itself is inefficient, and by moving to what others will probably label as pay for performance, and is just actually the way that other people work in the world. healthcare systems, healthcare administrators, healthcare workers shouldn't have a blank check. We need to find efficiencies, and you should be rewarded for being competitive. That is essentially, the system that we live in. So to do that in the healthcare system is to me, if we aren't doing that, that's what's crazy about this. What I also found striking was, seeing all of these images of these, of our hospitals and our healthcare workers, and how much of this was actually paid for with federal money. So tying this back in, because like all of these conversations are in some way go back to the conversation on separation. How are we going to be able to even administer healthcare as a province? Never mind finding efficiencies as a separate state, as a country. All of this technology, all of these things, even just bringing in drugs. What is the process going to be around regulating and importing things that we take and use on a daily basis in our healthcare system? We are so far under our heads, not only in this conversation, just in every aspect of our lives here in Alberta.
All right. We have to jump to a break. But when we come back, BC Conservatives pick their new leader and how it might impact politics in our province. More from our panel in a moment. Welcome back. BC Conservatives have picked their next leader.
I will unify and take the fight to grassroots British Columbians who've had enough of being pushed around.
In the conclusion to the party's leadership race over the weekend, former MP Carrie Lynn Findlay picked up 51% of the vote, while early frontrunner Caroline Elliott came up short at 49%. Findlay does not have a seat in the BC legislature, and it's believed a Conservative member will be asked to step down and open the door to a by-election for the new leader. Sarah, you were on hand for the outcome, had a role in the leadership race. To what degree was this an upset?
Well, I didn't, as much as I wish I could have. I didn't have a role, but I've been supportive of Caroline Elliott in the race from afar. She and I have been friends and former colleagues in the BC Liberal government for over 20 years. And I also know Ian Black, who came in third. And then I don't know the other three at all. So I went there to support her and hopefully be there when I saw a generational change in the Canadian political landscape. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be. I can tell you that that room was a fascinating place. When Carrie Lynn was announced as the leader, only, not surprisingly, based on the results, about half of the room erupted in cheers. But what I want to talk about, and what I think is really the most important part of this, is that who spoke before, the accountants and the returning officer, was actually BC MP from the Federal Conservative Party, Aaron Gunn. And he spoke longer than absolutely anyone, including the or now former interim leader, Trevor Halford. And if you want to ask me who the real leader of the BC Conservative Party is, it's Aaron Gunn. No questions asked. He controls that party in a way that Take Back Alberta, you could say, controls the UCP here in Alberta. And so I see the path of the BC Conservative Party now on a very similar trajectory in terms of the dynamics, internal party dynamics, as what we have here in Alberta.
Okay, so John, let me pick up on that. Well, for the party to pick Carrie Lynn Findlay, what does that suggest to you about the direction forward for the BC Conservatives, and now taking into consideration what Sarah just said as well?
Well, they certainly made the conservative choice. Carrie Lynn Findlay is a solid conservative. She was a former conservative MP and minister in Stephen Harper's government, and she was a conservative MP at the same time as Pierre Poilievre in Ottawa. So she is definitely a conservative of the Conservative Party of Canada brand of conservative. Now, that'll appeal to a lot of British Columbians because, if you follow BC politics and you look at the electoral map, both federally and provincially, the Conservatives dominate the interior of BC. except for a little pocket in the Kootenays and a little pocket in Kelowna, both the federal and provincial Conservatives hold all the seats in the interior of BC and the northern half of Vancouver Island. The problem is in Metro Vancouver and Metro Victoria, that's where the provincial NDP is strong and also where the federal Liberals are strong. And it's also problematic for the Conservatives that that's where half the population of British Columbia resides. So she's gonna hold the support that the BC Conservatives have in the interior of the province, but she has to unite the party. She has to try to bring some of those Conservative MLAs that were either kicked out or left the caucus, over the last year or two while Rustad was the leader. And then she has to organize for the next election campaign. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that she can win. But, the BC Conservatives have picked a very conservative choice in this leadership race.
Okay, so Sarah, what does this outcome then say about party unity and the prospect of having a real chance of winning the next provincial election in BC?
Well, I can tell you from being in that room on Saturday night is that as soon as Carrie Lynn Finlay was announced as the leader, phones started pinging, talking about a tweet from Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West, who has a background in NDP politics, but is a very much kind of a centrist now in 2026 as a mayor, and is able to kind of bridge left and right. And anyone can go back on X and see his posts, but there are a lot of people who are not okay with Carrie Lynn Finlay's kind of politics and the politics of her husband, actually, who is a sitting MLA and who was elected in the last election. And it is fair to say is responsible based on some of the comments and a very specific media incident around why the BC Conservative Party didn't actually win in the last election, along with other reasons. So it is very, very, very fascinating to see what's happening. The coalition is not united, and it is going to be very difficult for Carrie Lynn Finlay to keep the more establishment type Conservatives on her side. Caucus management is going to be a big challenge, and we will have I'm going to enjoy seeing what happens, but I'm disappointed, honestly, for British Columbians who don't get to benefit from Caroline Elliott's leadership.
Okay, so John, the last quick one to you. How do you see this potentially impacting politics here in our province? What's the carryover?
Well, it's really all going to depend on who wins the next election. All the candidates who are running for the leadership of the BC Conservative Party were all running on a pro-natural resource development, pro-business, pro-pipeline agenda. And it would make life a lot easier for the government of Alberta to work with the government of British Columbia if we had a partner in BC that was willing to work with us on natural resource development and the building of pipelines. And so it's really going to depend, Michael, on who wins the next election. And I hear what Sarah said. One thing I noticed on the weekend is Finlay got together with the BC caucus, and they seem to have had a very positive first meeting. So, the one thing that unites the BC Conservatives is the same thing that unites the Conservatives here in Alberta, and that is an antipathy towards the NDP and the desire to defeat the NDP in the next election. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years, Michael. We'll see what happens.
Indeed, indeed. Okay. We'll have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. John.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News, and it's about Alberta setting prices for some surgeries as part of its new funding model. According to Karen, this is how it starts: pay for one surgery, then another, and then all of them. Jeep Stuff tells us he would rather pay than wait 3 years. But McIsaac questions how many of these politicians have medical degrees. It's time that hospitals told the politicians what needs to be done. not the other way around. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, with Canadian municipal leaders gathering in Edmonton this week, we'll hear from the host mayor on key discussions and how the issue of separation might fit into the conversation. That's on Wednesday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.